Nobody thought this call would turn into a nightmare. It started like any other search, a missing person, a stretch of woods, a K-9 team doing what they always do. But within minutes, everything changed. Gunshots, screaming, hostages trapped with nowhere to run. And in the middle of it all, a dog nobody expected to see again stepped out of the trees like he'd never left. Charlie Hudson had lost hope. Everyone had lost hope. But Rex was never really gone, and what happens next proves that some bonds cannot be broken. No matter how long they've been apart, the woods were quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people nervous without knowing why. Michelle stood near the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the tree line when she spotted something moving low to the ground. A dog, thin, dirty, clearly exhausted, but alive. She called out to the others, confusion in her voice, asking how the animal had even gotten there in the first place. Before anyone could answer, tension spiked. A man named Gus stepped forward, and someone nearby cocked a gun, ready to fire at what they thought was nothing more than a stray. Voices rose. Someone shouted to take it easy, insisting it was just a lost dog, nothing to worry about. But Gus wasn't convinced. He kept his eyes locked on the animal, unsure if this was really as simple as it looked. The dog stood there, uncertain, clearly lost, clearly searching for something or someone. Nobody in that clearing understood yet just how much this moment would matter. They ordered the dog to stay back, treating him like an afterthought, a stray that had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. But the dog didn't leave. He lingered at the edge of the group, watching, waiting, as if he knew something the humans around him didn't. The air grew heavier. Somewhere close, unseen, the real danger was still unfolding. Rocks shifted under someone's boot. A tense silence stretched between the trees, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, faintly at first, a low growl rumbled from the dog's throat. It wasn't aggression. It was recognition. It was instinct kicking in, the kind of instinct that only comes from training, from bonding, from a history nobody in that clearing could have guessed. The growl deepened, and suddenly, everyone's attention snapped back to the animal they had dismissed only moments earlier. Something was about to happen, and the dog seemed to know it before anyone else did. A whine cut through the tension, then barking, sharp and urgent, echoing through the woods like an alarm no one had asked for but everyone needed to hear. The barking grew louder, more frantic, pulling attention away from Gus and toward the deeper parts of the forest, as if the dog was trying to warn them, trying to lead them somewhere they hadn't thought to look. Then, cutting through the chaos, a whistle rang out. Sharp, familiar, deliberate. It was Charlie. And the moment that whistle reached the dog's ears, everything changed. The barking stopped just long enough for the animal to turn toward the sound, torn between instinct and memory, between the danger nearby and the voice he hadn't heard in what felt like forever. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Nobody in that clearing understood what was unfolding, but they were about to find out that this wasn't just any dog wandering through the woods. This was Rex. And Rex was about to change everything. The whistle cut through the forest like a signal only one creature was meant to understand. And true to instinct, Rex broke into a run, his paws tearing through fallen leaves and loose dirt as he pushed deeper into the trees. The barking from before had not been random. It had been a warning, a signal of his own. And now that Charlie's whistle called him back, the pieces of what was happening began falling into place for everyone watching. Rex moved fast, weaving between trunks, his nose low, tracking something the others could not yet see or understand. From somewhere close, a man's voice cried out in surprise, sharp and startled, the kind of sound a person makes when they realize they have been caught off guard. It was Gus, and the shock in his voice suggested he had not expected anyone, let alone Rex, to find him so quickly. Charlie's voice followed, low and disbelieving, saying he thought Gus was dead, a statement that hung heavy in the air and hinted at a history far deeper than anyone standing in that clearing had realized. This was not just a routine search. This was personal. There was a past between these two, a story that had clearly ended, in Charlie's mind, with Gus no longer being a problem. Yet here he was, alive, hiding in these woods, and Rex had sniffed him out before anyone else even had a chance to react. The dog's bark shifted into something more controlled, more focused, standing his ground near Gus like a wall no one could push past. Rex sniffed at the air around him, circling slightly, sensing more than just Gus's presence. Something else was going on, something involving supplies, movement, people hiding in plain sight. Michelle, still trying to process what was unfolding, muttered something about hunger, guessing that the dog was simply starving after wandering the woods alone for so long. But she quickly realized there was no food in the bag Gus carried, and that observation alone raised more questions than answers. Why was Gus carrying a bag at all? What was he hiding, and why did Rex seem more interested in the bag than in Gus himself? Before anyone could dig deeper, Charlie's whistle rang out again, sharper this time, more urgent, cutting through the tension like a blade. The mood shifted instantly. What had felt like a strange but manageable situation suddenly spiraled into chaos. Dramatic, pounding tension filled the air as Michelle cried out, her voice laced with fear, and the sound of Rex snarling erupted right afterward. Aggressive and defensive, a clear sign that danger had just escalated. Barking turned frantic. Someone shouted in confusion, stunned by how quickly things had changed. And in the middle of the noise, Charlie's voice rose above it all, calling out for Gus, not once but twice. His voice trembling with an urgency that made it clear something had gone terribly wrong. The sound of handcuffs clinking followed, cold and final, snapping shut on wrists that had clearly been struggling. It became obvious then that Gus was not simply hiding out of fear. He was part of something larger, something that involved hostages, danger, and people desperate not to be found. Charlie's voice cut through again, flat and certain, stating plainly that Gus wasn't coming, a phrase loaded with meaning, suggesting that whatever plan Gus had hoped to pull off had just fallen apart completely. Muffled cries broke out from two other voices, Shawnee and Lori, their exclamations barely understandable but filled with unmistakable fear, confirming that they had been trapped, restrained, or hidden somewhere nearby the entire time. This was bigger than one missing man in the woods. This was a hostage situation, and Rex, the dog everyone had dismissed as lost or stray only minutes earlier, was now standing at the center of unraveling it. Charlie's tone softened for just a moment as he praised Rex, calling him a good boy, his voice carrying both relief and disbelief. After everything, after the doubt, after the fear that Rex might never return, here he was, solving the case before anyone else even understood what was happening. Someone asked, almost in a whisper, where Rex had even come from. Unable to comprehend how a dog who had vanished under mysterious circumstances had somehow reappeared at exactly the right moment to crack open a case nobody saw coming. But there was no time to dwell on the mystery. Officers moved quickly now, confirming that the suspects were finally contained, their plan completely dismantled thanks to Rex's instincts and Charlie's unshakable trust in his partner. The hostages, Shawnee and Lori, were declared safe, pulled from danger just in time, their fear replaced with stunned relief as they realized how close they had come to a much darker outcome. What started as a quiet, uneventful stretch of woods had turned into one of the most dramatic rescues anyone on the team had witnessed in a long time. And at the heart of it all stood Rex, proving once again that his instincts could never be underestimated. No matter how long he had been away or how impossible his return seemed. Charlie knelt beside him, running a hand along Rex's fur, still processing the fact that his partner had somehow found his way back. Not just physically, but emotionally, exactly when he was needed the most. The bond between them had never truly been broken, only tested, and this moment proved that no distance, no mystery, and no amount of time apart could weaken the connection they shared. As officers led the suspects away and paramedics checked on Shawnee and Lori, Charlie stayed close to Rex, unwilling to let him out of his sight again, knowing now more than ever that Rex wasn't just a police dog. He was family, and family always finds their way back home no matter what stands in their way. Back at the station, the atmosphere was heavy with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Charlie sat across from his captain, trying to explain everything that had just happened, and even as he spoke the words out loud, they still felt unreal to him. Rex had been gone for weeks, missing under circumstances nobody had been able to fully explain, and now here he was. Not only alive, but responsible for cracking open a case that had stumped the entire department. The captain leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, listening carefully as Charlie recounted how Rex had appeared out of nowhere in those woods, how his instincts had led him straight to Gus, and how that discovery had unraveled a hostage situation nobody even knew was happening. It sounded almost too perfect, too convenient, and the captain couldn't help but ask the question that had been sitting in the back of everyone's mind. Where exactly had Rex been all this time, and how had he ended up in those woods at the exact moment Gus and his crew were making their move? Charlie didn't have an answer, not yet, but he intended to find one. He knew Rex well enough to understand that dogs don't simply wander into the middle of a criminal operation by accident. Something or someone had led Rex there, and Charlie was determined to trace the thread back to its source. Meanwhile, in a separate interrogation room, Gus sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, refusing to look up even as detectives pressed him for details. He knew that whatever he said next could implicate people far more dangerous than himself, and the fear in his posture suggested he understood exactly how much trouble he was in. Shauna and Lori, the two hostages who had been pulled from that terrifying ordeal, sat together in a nearby room, wrapped in blankets, still shaking from the adrenaline of everything they had just survived. When investigators asked them to describe what had happened, their accounts painted a picture far darker than anyone had expected. This wasn't a simple robbery gone wrong or a desperate man hiding out in the woods. This had been planned, coordinated, and Gus was only one piece of a much larger operation. Shauna explained, her voice trembling, that they had been taken days earlier, moved from location to location, kept isolated and terrified, with no idea if or when they would ever be found. Lori added that their captors spoke about a bigger plan, something involving more people, more money, and stakes far higher than a simple kidnapping. The detectives exchanged glances, realizing that what Rex had stumbled into wasn't just a lucky break. It was the tip of something much larger, something that could expose a criminal network operating far beyond the borders of their quiet town. Back in the woods, forensic teams combed through the area where Gus had been hiding, uncovering supplies, maps, and communication devices that suggested this operation had been active for far longer than anyone initially believed. Charlie stood at the edge of the scene, watching as evidence bags were carried out one by one, his mind racing with questions about how deep this went and how close his own team had come to missing it entirely if not for Rex. He thought back to the moment Rex had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, and a nagging feeling settled in his gut. Rex hadn't just wandered into these woods by chance. Someone must have released him, or he had escaped from somewhere nearby, and either possibility meant there was more to uncover about where Rex had been during his disappearance. As the investigation deepened, whispers began to circulate among the team about a connection between this case and an old, unsolved investigation from years earlier, one that had gone cold after key witnesses disappeared without a trace. Could Rex's disappearance somehow be tied to that same case? Charlie wasn't ready to dismiss the possibility, especially not after everything he had just witnessed. Later that evening, as the station quieted down and most of the team went home, Charlie remained behind, sitting beside Rex in the kennel area, gently running his hand along the dog's fur while his mind worked through everything that had happened. Rex, exhausted but alert, watched him closely, almost as if he understood the weight of what they had just uncovered. Charlie spoke softly, more to himself than to Rex, wondering aloud how a single dog could end up at the center of something this massive, something that could potentially expose a network far more dangerous than they had ever dealt with before. He promised Rex, and maybe himself, that he wouldn't stop digging until he understood exactly what